everybody, this is Jeff Reid. I'm the webmaster of AlaskanAtheist.me, and what you're seeing right now is Lake Taku in Anchorage, Alaska, which is still pretty much frozen over here in mid-April. I'm an atheist and an ex-Christian now, but I was very religious for 15 years of my younger life, and I cycled through periods of devout religious belief and periods of doubt and unbelief when I drank a lot and used a lot of drugs, because I didn't know it at the time, but I was mentally ill, and I was doing the best I could, self-medicating to deal with the symptoms of the illness that I didn't know I had. And so in my religious cycling pretty much stopped in 2000 when I did a lot of research and made the journey from religious belief to atheism. But there have been a few times over the years that I've had some very public quote-unquote reconversion experiences and went back to religious belief for short periods of time, some very brief bipolar-induced religious episodes. But I hope the video that I have made and posted on YouTube on bipolar religiosity gives you some insight into what I've been through over the years. And I hope you find it helpful for you or somebody you love. Thanks. Y'all take care. Hey everybody, it's Jeff Reid, and I'm going to start my hike back to the Eagle River Nature Center while I talk. I'm a couple of miles out on the Dew Mountain Trail, and so hopefully I can share some beautiful scenery while I find my way back to the Nature Center. And I want to talk about my mental health conditions, which are bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder. And I was raised United Methodist, and I was fine until I was 10. And then I had a very serious seizure that almost killed me, and almost paralyzed me. But I survived it, but it did bring my mental health issues to the forefront. I was a happy kid before the seizure happened, and then not so happy once I recovered from it. I had lots of behavioral problems, and I was on a drug called phenobarbital to keep me from having another seizure. And that caused me a lot of behavioral issues at school, and the kids were pretty rough on me. But let's see, back to religion. I was raised United Methodist until I was 10, and stopped going to church because I told my parents that I didn't believe what that church was teaching. So, hey, I was a pretty smart kid, right? And I didn't have any issues with religion until my teenage years, when we moved across town and I met my fundamentalist Christian neighbors, and we had some good discussions, and I went to church with them a few times, and but it just didn't stick. I didn't believe. And so then when I was 19, I met a friend of mine in drama class named Mike, and he, at first I told him to get away from me with that Jesus shit, But he was persistent, and I was gloriously saved on March 7th, 1985. And so I did not realize it at the time, but that began 15 years of alternating between very devout Christian religious belief and periods of doubt and unbelief when I was depressed. When I was manic, I was religious. When I was depressed, I was drinking heavily and using drugs, and obviously I wasn't in church worshiping Jesus. But then the mania would come again, and I would, religion would start making sense to me again, and the only time it does is when I'm manic. And anyway, I kind of lost my train of thought. I'm trying to watch where I'm going through this muddy ground. Anyway, I spent 15 years of my life. I got to step over a tree, fallen tree here, but as you can see, it's small. It's no big deal, but I need to let the folks at the Nature Center know about it. Anyway, I lived in Texas at the time, and I was born and raised there, and my first church was Shady Oaks Assembly of God in Lake Jackson, Texas. And I found out that I found out that I could do solos and that people would love to hear me sing. But that's not what you want to hear about in this glorious video. So let me see if I can get my thoughts back on track. I spent 15 years. So I wasn't alternating between religious belief and pretty much agnosticism. When I was manic, I was extremely religious, and when I was depressed, I was drinking and using drugs, and I know you've already heard that, but boy, it's beautiful country out here. I've lived in Alaska for 12 years, and the natural beauty I'm surrounded by never gets old. And it's a beautiful sunny day, not a cloud in the sky, 48 degrees. And I'm in a long-sleeved hiking shirt, and I'm fine. So anyway, back to religion. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in 1998 when I was 32, and that diagnosis explained my life up until then. It explained it very well. And I almost didn't get treatment, but my doctor at the hospital in Austin, Texas, I was about to walk out of his office and say, "The hell with this," but he said very emphatically that he thought he could help me. So I'm going to have to stop and catch my breath. I'm way out of shape. And I'm afraid I'm going to run out of room on this phone for this video, and it's just past the 7.5 minute mark, and it's already almost a gig of video. So you know what, that's a lot. It's a big file to work with. I'm going to continue this later, but I hope you've enjoyed the scenery, and I'll continue with this talk at home. Y'all take care. Hey everybody, this is Jeff, and I want to talk to you about bipolar mania and religiosity while I hike along this beautiful trail out in the Alaskan wilderness close to Eagle River. So Eagle River is, I don't know, 10 or 15 miles north of Anchorage on the Glen Highway. And I sure hope I'm going the right way here. I believe I am. But anyway, one of the symptoms of bipolar mania is religiosity, and it runs the gamut from mild interest in religion to delusions of, you know, thinking that you're Jesus or God or some famous prophet or something. Yes, I'm out of shape. You can hear me breathing hard. Plus, I'm tackling some uphill runs. But religiosity for me has manifested in several different ways. It ranges from extreme fundamentalist Christian belief, or it can be Eastern belief. I'll get really interested in Eastern religion and Eastern spirituality, Buddhism, Hinduism. There was a time, I'm going to have to stop and catch my breath. There was a time, just a few years ago, that I seriously considered converting to Hinduism. Of course, I was manic at the time, and I attended a Hindu temple in Anchorage a couple of times, and that was very interesting, but also, of course, very different from a Christian church. But a very interesting experience anyway, and the religiosity can take even darker forms, like back in my teenage years before I became a Christian, I was actually flirting a bit with Satanism and listening to Kiss songs like Heaven's on Fire and Lick It Up and fancying myself a Satanist. But of course I was a teenager at the time, and that was just some bullshit that I was going through. But I was drinking heavily and using a lot of drugs, smoking a lot of pot. Well, I don't know if my phone caught it or not, but there's a butterfly out here. At least one. And I just, I don't know what to comment beyond that, but I spent years, and nobody knew what was wrong with me, and I spent years alternating between extreme religious belief and skepticism. I don't know if this video is going to work or not for the purpose that my friend Kate has in mind, because I know my thoughts are not overly organized, but I wanted to gives this a shot of sharing my thoughts out in this beautiful wilderness setting. But even though I know that when I'm manic, I'm likely to have a strong interest in religion, and I know that it's not real, and that when the mania fades away, so will the religious belief, it's very, very difficult for me not to get caught up in it all, because it feels so real. And I would swear that I feel the presence of God very, very strongly. And, you know, religion that I recognize as bullshit when I'm either depressed or on a more even keel suddenly starts making sense again to me. And people that have known me long enough know that I cycle through these phases, and that eventually I will come back to my senses and be okay. But back in 2002, I had a very popular website that was called Religion is Bullshit. And at that time, I was determined to build the largest anti-Christian atheist website on the net. And yeah, I was so angry at the time that I wanted to bring Christianity to its knees and exterminate it. Oh, I slipped. But and I did have a popular site, but back in 2004, I decided to take it offline because I was feeling bad about it. I thought it was negative, and my friends tried to tell me otherwise, and I didn't listen. And took it offline, and that was 12 years ago, so it's ancient history on the internet, but I regret it to this day. And I've tried different sites since then, and I've never had even nearly as much success as I did with that first site. But it's also because of my bipolar manic cycling. And back when I decided to shut my site down in 2004, I was going through a manic phase, and religion was making sense to me again. And sure enough, after I shut my site down, I went through a brief but very intense Christian religious phase. And of course it didn't last, because when the mania died down, so did the religious beliefs. And I went through that as recently as 2013. In February of 2013, my dad and I were looking for something interesting to watch on TV, and we found a program on demonology. And at that hour of the night, it was the only thing on that we thought was worth watching, and it was interesting, but it triggered me. And I didn't realize how manic I was at the time, and I really went off the deep end back into Christianity, and started attending a large church that is not very far from where we live. And I got back into it really heavily. I was listening to Keith Green and Amy Grant and Michael W. Smith and praying and reading my Bible and, you know, really getting back into it. And I went to a couple of classes at this church that I thought were very helpful at the time, and made a few friends. But of course, once the mania started dying down in April, the religious beliefs started to die down as well. And sure enough, by May, I was back to normal again, and feeling embarrassed that I had gone off the deep end the way I did. But my friends understood and my family understood, and they didn't make a big deal of it. So anyway, boy, I'm glad this is downhill. 50 years old and in size 42 jeans, and yeah, I'm overweight and out of shape, but at least I can still get out and do this, even if it is harder than it once was when I was in better shape. And I'm walking through mud. But it's 48 degrees out here or thereabouts right now, and I have not encountered any snow or ice. So I can, when I get back to the nature center, I can report good trail conditions, at least for the couple of miles that I traveled this trail. Just mud, but no, you know, mud's no big deal. If you can't handle mud, you're not going to hike in Alaska. But anyway, I think that's all I've got to say for now, and I hope you've enjoyed the scenery. So y'all take care.